Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Welcome back to Subway Sports Talk. My name is Peter Kennedy, and we're here to talk about the NBA draft just a little bit because we got a big NBA draft episode coming up before Thursday for the big night. But we got to talk about a couple things that I have in mind. Of course, if you're just listening on YouTube here, we also did a baseball segment today, about 50 minutes of me and Andrew Kalani talking all things Mets and Yankees. So if you're on YouTube, go back and listen to that. And if you're on the podcast app, you already heard it. So thanks for listening. And now let's get into it with the NBA. I'm not going to deep dive right now into all of the intricate moving pieces with all the different prospects and the mock drafts and the et cetera. I'm going to save that for Thursday, but I have a few overarching thoughts and a few thoughts about our New York Knicks, because the Knicks are in the mix, as always, pulling up in rumors left and right about Kyrie Irving, eye roll, and about moving up to 2, moving up to 4, getting from 11 to some other position in this draft to draft the player they really want, which I love the idea of. But as we know, as Knicks fans and as people who follow the NBA, the Knicks get dragged into every rumor that exists, doesn't exist, is real, not real, doesn't matter. The Knicks are in the rumor, right? So I want to balance that out. But before we get into the Knicks side of things, I want to talk about the general idea of drafting here and how we're looking at a lot of these prospects, specifically starting and using the top 3 guys as kind of like a litmus test of how we grade these guys and what we look for in these prospects. Because I think there's a really, really difficult thing that happens with the NBA draft in regards to potential, in regards to current skill set, in regards to the person behind the combine numbers and the statistics, that makes a huge difference when drafting in the lottery of an NBA draft. And it really is specific a lot of times to the NBA. Me and Andrew were just talking about it. You know, baseball is such a big draft, takes so many years. No one really cares. It is what it is. Football is a little bit more straightforward. We understand the positions that need to be drafted early. At least we do for the most part now. We understand the meaning of quarterbacks, and team building makes a lot more sense. When it comes to the NBA, though, on the other hand, you get this really weird situation for these teams that are in the lottery that in reality, they're there because they're not good enough, right? They're just in the lottery because they're not good. They don't have enough talent on the roster. You know, obviously that takes away the Warrior situation where they're just hurt with no Klay Thompson, no Steph Curry, and they end up with a top 2 pick, right? That's not normal. Normal is the Sacramento Kings, the New York Knicks, the Detroit Pistons, the Orlando Magic, always drafting anywhere from 1 to 14 because they're just not good enough. But when that happens, GMs and fans alike start to kind of wrap their thoughts around their head a little too tight and think too much about fit and think too much about positional need than I think they should. Because in reality, with basketball, the best players can find a way. The most talented players can play with somebody who's exactly like them. You know, outside of a center, you really can find any position on the court who can play with somebody else very similar to them. Maybe you could also take out the 6-foot point guard, right? You don't want 2 6-foot point guards on your team. You could probably only have one at a time. You probably only have one 7-footer at a time. But everything in between, which oftentimes is a good chunk of the players who are going in the lottery, you got to take the best player. And that comes into the conversation with Jaden Ivey, who's projected at the 4 spot with the Sacramento Kings. Do you take him even though you have De'Aaron Fox? Do you even love De'Aaron Fox? Can Jaden Ivey play with De'Aaron Fox? Those are really important conversations to have, because if you don't think about that and you say, I can't take Jaden Ivey because I have De'Aaron Fox, and then in 2 years, Fox is off the team, Ivey's the best player in the range of your draft pick, and you have Keegan Murray, who's an okay player and not moving the needle. That's something you want to avoid. That's something that's very difficult. And right now, with the teams that are picking first, you have the Magic, you have the Thunder, you have the Rockets, and you have the Pistons, who are all in that range of like, you just need really good players. And if Cade Cunningham is your guy right now, you can pick a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 to play with him, and it'll work out. If you have Jalen Green on your team and you expect him to be a true NBA starting caliber player, a star level player, you can't not take another shooting guard wing because you have Jalen Green if that guy's the best player, right? So thinking about Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith, and Chet Holmgren, just to use those guys as the ideations of this, I think very much so about what they bring to the table and then what happens from there. Because right now, depending on who you ask, Jabari Smith is probably the surest thing out of those three picks. He's the guy who you can so specifically see how he can be successful on a basketball court that you think there's no bust potential. And you think there is some star potential, perhaps not a ton of star potential. Paolo Banchero, on the other hand, is a much more dynamic playmaker, a guy who can do more with the ball in his hand. And also at Duke played with a lot of talented players who he fit in around and also lifted up, right? So those two players right there, Chet Holmgren kind of fits into a little bit of both categories here, but those two players right there are very different. And in this particular case, people are arguing what is better, what is worse. But what I'm more or less hearing is that they're more nervous about Paolo falling out as not a good player in the NBA than they are Jabari Smith. And they're not always accounting for the possibilities of Paolo being a true NBA superstar when Jabari Smith is most likely a very good starter and not a superstar. So where does the line get drawn? Where do you have to decide on, hey, I already have a forward on my team who I really like. Do I not take Paolo? I already have a stretchy wing power forward shooter. Do I not take Jabari Smith? I think that has to get absolutely thrown out the window. Because if these guys are truly top three NBA prospects right now, they can play with somebody exactly like them on the team. And it may not be the perfect fit today, but if you pass on your guy now and he ends up being the better version of what you already had, you're losing. You're in the background. So when it comes to the NBA draft, it's very important to balance out the idea of potential and current status. And I think that's really, really tough for a lot of people when it comes to this draft. To use the Knicks as an example now, Benedict Mathurin is a guy who I absolutely love, who I'll talk about in a little bit. Well, I guess talk about him right now too. He's not a very different position than RJ Barrett. In fact, they are a similar size and stature. They have a similar demeanor when it comes to intensity and the want to be great, but they're both just not primary ball handlers. They're both not quite knockdown shooters. They're both good defenders who need to just be a little bit more consistent, but their positives are there and obvious. Should the Knicks not pick Benedict Mathurin because of RJ Barrett? I would say absolutely not. If you think he is the guy, you find a way for those two to work together, for those two to fit on the court at the same time. Because if you think he's the best player, then he's the best option to do it. Instead of taking a guy who's a 4 or a point guard who you're now taking at 11, who's probably should be picked 17th, that sets you up for failure, right? So you think through all these names. You got Jaden Ivey, Keegan Murray, Dyson Daniels, AJ Griffin, Jalen Duran from Memphis. Like these are the names in the range of the Knicks right now. And I see the Knicks mocked to Jalen Duran. And I get it. He's a very athletic player who does things on the court where you occasionally say, holy crap, that's transferable. That's going to make plays in the NBA. But then you start thinking, is that type of center the pick that's worthwhile, right? Is that type of impactful player the best player available? Is he the person who can help bring this team to a new level? I'm not quite sure. I'd much rather go for that wing who can handle a little bit, who can shoot a little bit, who has the attitude to be successful and get better over time. And so it's a very hard thing to break down because every team has needs. Every team has at least 1 to 3 players that they like already, right? Like there's already teams there that people are going to feel good about, right? Like if you think about even the Hornets, who are just slated a spot or two below, they have Miles Bridges, who's a really good wing, who I really like. Does that mean they should not look at wings in the middle part of the draft? No, if they got another Miles Bridges, they'd be in great shape, right? So it's really tough. And going back to the top 3 guys here, Chet Holmgren, probably somewhere in between the ceiling and floor of Jabari and Paolo, where Jabari's floor is really high, his ceiling might not be as high. Paolo's floor might be a little lower, but his ceiling's a little higher. Chet's probably somewhere in the middle where he's got a good floor and a higher ceiling. But you can't pick for fit. You can't say, oh, we're the Orlando Magic. We have the number 1 pick. We have a couple bigs that we like. We have Cole Anthony and Markelle Fultz, so we can't take blah, blah, blah. No. It absolutely comes down to the one player who you think is the best NBA guy, the guy who can add the most wins to a team, however he can do it. Because I don't care who you have, right? Like Cade Cunningham is amazing. He's at 5, right? If you got a carbon copy of him and put him with himself in Detroit, you're in great shape. So fit is this weird thing when it comes to the NBA draft, especially in the lottery, where I don't think it matters at all. And people are starting to say, oh, this guy, he might not fit that great with Orlando, but he's probably the better player. Then you got to take him. If you think Paolo Banchero is the best player, which I happen to think so. I think he's the most impactful NBA guy, the guy with the highest ceiling to do the most, to be a leader offensively, a playmaker, a scorer, the whole nine. I think he has to be the guy because you can't get too cute. You can't get too cute in the NBA draft. And that leads me to the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks are slated at 11 right now. Depending on the mock draft, I just mentioned some of the names. You'll see AJ Griffin. You'll see Jeremy Sohan, Jalen Duran, Johnny Davis, Mark Williams. Some of these guys are good players. Some of these guys are going to have good NBA careers. But where do you see a change in culture? Where do you see a guy who's relentlessly going to want to get better? Where do you see a guy who impacts the NBA game on the levels that matter most, which are what? In my estimation, if you like, depending on your position, obviously a little bit, but you have to be able to either shoot the ball at a high efficiency or get to the rim at great efficiency. You have to be able to play defense and you have to be able to move the ball. Those things are absolutely those are the start. If you don't have them, they're non-starters, right? Like those things are a necessity for any of these NBA players to be good players. And I look at these guys here, and there's a few that I don't particularly love, and one of which is Johnny Davis. And it's not because I don't think he fits next to RJ Barrett. I don't like him as a prospect in the NBA in general. I don't expect him to be one of the people out there who is going to impact in multiple ways, who's going to consistently and efficiently get buckets and then be able to defend on the other end. It has nothing to do that he's the same size as RJ Barrett and plays the same position. If Johnny Davis was a better shooter and a little bit better defender, I would say let's take him right now. Book it. 11th, Johnny Davis to New York Knicks. But what he does on the court, I don't think it works next to RJ Barrett. I don't think it works against next to most NBA stars or NBA all-star caliber players. So that's why I go away from a Johnny Davis. A Jeremy Sohan, on the other hand, a guy who's not as polished as of a scorer, but is a freak athlete who can rebound, who can do a lot of things, who moves the ball really well. That's a guy who you say, all right, 11th. Is his upside an all-star upside? Probably not, but he's an impactful player in many ways. And when you're picking at 11, you're really looking for impact. You're really looking for pushing towards more victories. So that's what I'm looking at. AJ Griffin's another example here. A guy, barring the injuries and all that concern with the knees, he's had multiple knee surgeries. He's a guy who translates to the NBA as a shooter without a doubt and has athleticism with the ball. His defense is not great right now. That could be due to the knees. It's just a little bit weird that he looks so athletic with the ball and then not on defense. But he's a player who projects to be impactful in the NBA. He's a guy who you have to consider taking. And it starts to split hairs. And I don't want to go too deep onto all these individual prospects, because again, I'm saving that for a later date. But as you hear about all these things, as you hear about the Knicks' opportunities to possibly trade up, you have to ask, at what cost? Who are we going for? Is there a guy in that, 4 or 2, I guess 2 is a possibility, 2, 4, 6 through 8 range that is worthwhile moving up for, that we think is going to be an impactful NBA player, no matter who he's playing with, no matter who his teammates are? What can that guy do in the NBA? Whether it be off the bench in a great bench unit, whether it be fitting in as the 3rd, 4th, or 5th starter. It's the same type of concept that kind of stung a little bit with Obi Toppin, right? Because he's a guy who had skills to be impactful in the NBA. And then because of the fit, he wasn't allowed to do the things that make him successful. Now, is that the fault of Obi Toppin? Is that the fault of the scouts and the GMs that said he's the guy to pick? in part, but mostly it's due to them sticking him in the corner and cutting off his wings and saying, yeah, you're not the guy who's going to be running up and down the court with the ball in his hand and attacking and shooting when you're open. Just go stand in the corner. You got to learn how to hit corner threes. So the before and the after don't always tell the truth either. And that's why this is such a hard job. That's why we spend hours looking at YouTube clips. And that's why we spend hours trying to figure out who's the guy for the Knicks to take or for whatever team you like. So when it comes down to this draft, and we're going to try and move up, if Jaden Ivey is that guy, I'm thrilled. Because what that tells me is they think he's an impactful NBA player. And the fit with RJ Barrett, we're going to figure it out. That's what that tells me. And that's what I love about the idea of the Knicks moving up. If you move up and you say, yeah, well, we're not going to get Jaden Ivey. Now we're just going to get, we're going to get Keegan Murray or we're going to get Sohan or something like that. Could we have gotten a very similar type of player at a similar position at 11 and not had to give up an asset here, an asset there? I don't know. So when it comes down to it, my point here is for the Knicks to go up. If they do choose to trade up, they need to be absolutely sure that the guy they're going for is the guy, is the person who will make an impact, who can play with anybody because he's an NBA caliber basketball player and not some pigeonholed star who showed up in college and did positive things in college. That's not enough. It's not enough. You need to fit in this league. And if you can fit in this league, you can fit with any good players. Right now, the Knicks don't have that many good players. And that's another thing. There's holes everywhere. We might love Quickly. We might love Barrett. We might love Mitch. We may feel whatever how we feel with Julius Randle right now. None of those positions are off the board. None of them. If there's a 2, you take the 2. Mathurin, he's probably a 2 with a little 1 in him. Ivy might be a 2 with a little 1 in him. Multiple ball handlers is better. Those guys need to play together. To hit the best stride, those guys need to work with each other. RJ's shown that he can do it. These next guy has to show he can do it too. So again, more prospect specific talk coming up on Thursday when we're going to talk about the top 10, some of the sleepers, the whole 9, how we always do it for the NBA draft. One of my favorite times of the year. It's always so crazy how you're rushing into the finals. And, we had so many days off, probably had more time to prep for this draft here, but the finals end and it's like, boom, NBA draft time. So it's a great time. I'll be answering questions online. We're going to do another pod. It should be great fun. So look forward to Thursday. Hopefully the Knicks make the right decision. We'll talk Thursday about what we think that's going to be. So thanks for listening. YouTube right here. Don't forget to hit the subscription button and the notifications button so you know when we post new videos on the podcast app, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if it's possible. All the stuff is awesome. I appreciate you so much. And the comments and the whatnot, it really helps us grow. It helps get the conversation going. So if you're listening to this, listening to any episode ever, don't be afraid to drop in your thought, drop in your take. I want to hear it. And that little comment, that little thing that you can put out there from your perspective, it helps me understand what you guys are feeling and it helps this thing grow. So for Subway Sports Talk, that's all I got right now. I'm Pete Kennedy. Thanks to Andrew Kalani, talking baseball. That episode is here, that video on YouTube is here as well. That's all I got. Cheers. Talk to you soon.